When you think of marketing, you more than likely think of marketing to your customers, how you can persuade more people to buy what you sell. But another market that's just as important is your employees, the very people who can make the brand connect better with your customers. Yet quite often we find that companies ignore this critical constituency. Now, why is internal marketing so important? Because it's the best way to help employees make powerful emotional connections to the products and services you sell. Without that connection, employees are just likely to undermine the expectations set by your external marketing and advertising. According to Gallup's State of the Global Workplace, only 15% of employees, that's 15% of employees, are engaged in the workplace. Now, that doesn't bode well for most businesses. So, how can we reverse this trend? Our guest today has some insights, which we'll get into in just a bit. Hello, and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast brought to you by Spreadwith.com. I'm Vinay Koshy, and our guest today is Kerry-Ann Stimpson. Kerry-Ann, you've been a CMO for something like well over 20 years in the financial services marketing space. I believe you've had experiences with things like marketing strategy, digital marketing, social media, market research, branding, and marketing communications. So you're a podcaster as well and a business communications coach. But I'm curious, this idea of internal marketing, was there a particular incident or event that triggered your interest in internal marketing and becoming such an advocate for it?
Hi, Vinay. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here to share with you and your wonderful audience. Internal marketing, of course, is not a nomenclature I can claim. It's not something I came up with, but you asked the question how I guess, got very interested in the concept because as a marketer, we know that in marketing school, as it were, we would normally just talk about the customer, which is perfect because yes, customers are why we're in business. And if customers aren't in love with us and don't buy our products and services, then there's a problem. But we never really delved into the whole matter of employees and employee engagement and employee advocacy and how employees can support the process of building a brand and driving growth. And so, why it would have come full circle or certainly center of focus for me is even though you mentioned I'm in financial services and I know the majority of your audience are in the B2B tech space, our offerings are usually intangibles, right? They're not anything you can touch like toothpaste or a bar of soap. We rely heavily on interpersonal reactions to either serve our customers, interpersonal interactions to serve our customers, or to even just sell the product or service that we're trying to offer. And when you look at that, you recognize that employees really play a very important role in delivering on the brand promise that we've made to the customer in all of our wonderful marketing material. They play a huge role in making sure that the conversations that lead up through the decision-making process that prospects have to become customers, the role they play is very important. And then, of course, customers would faster believe the word of our employees than they would believe the wonderful messages that we share in our official marketing channel. So to think that we can market a brand without engaging our employees, who are the ones who deliver on the promise and can be the best advocates of the brand, to exclude them from the process is not something that's well advised. And there it was. I launched a podcast because I didn't see any podcast that kind of dug into this area. And it's been a wonderful journey and a wonderful conversation ever since. And I've gotten the chance to come here and share it with you and your wonderful audience.
Certainly. And thank you for that. I'm also curious, given your journey to date, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
So my personal area of strength, I would say, is communication for the most part, and specifically strategic communication, recognizing that, first of all, communication is not only about the message that you want to share, the source or the messenger is important, but understanding your audience is important as well, knowing how to analyze your audience. What are their fears, their concerns, what knowledge they bring to the table, and in understanding that, you can craft the kind of communication strategy and ultimately message that's going to effectively get the outcome that you want.
And in that area of strength, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
I believe that businesses really need to take more time analyzing their audiences, as I would have
Mhm.
mentioned earlier. As a business owner and even as a marketer or any leader in business, we have to appreciate the fact that our target audiences typically don't care about our brand. They don't care
Mhm.
about our products and services. So our goal is to make them care, to build a sense of curiosity and engagement in our audiences to get them to, again, do what it is we want them to do, whether it be to buy a product or service, to become part of our community. And to do that, we have to spend more time digging deeper into analyzing our audiences and helping us, rather, our team, to understand what makes them tick, what would engage them best, so we can use that information to inform how we communicate.
No, that's an interesting perspective. Usually, most people would advocate that line of thinking to our external customers. So I'm curious, how does this apply internally? Most people would say that they should know their employees pretty well, but from what you're saying, you're suggesting we dive a bit deeper, perhaps, to what we think we know to discover what is really true. Is that the case?
The first mistake I think as leaders we often make in business is that we assume that the employees are working for us. They're actually working for themselves. Employees work with us as a means to an end. Usually it's a financial goal that they have in mind, whether it be to pay a mortgage, send their children to school, or pay a utility bill. Or they are perhaps part of our organization because they believe in our wider purpose. Whatever it is, they are working for themselves. And once we embrace that, we then have to acknowledge that how we engage them would have to be based on that what's in it for me, what's in it for them. And so it has to come from a place of, as a business, recognizing that we do need to dig a lot deeper into understanding what makes our employees tick, help understanding how they see the product, which is the culture and the job that they're in with us. Do they believe that we're a company that believes in them, is desirous of having their best interest at heart? And once we're able to understand that, then in communicating with them, we can best deliver the messages that they want to hear and that they see is really something that is at the heart of what it is they want to accomplish, and not so much only what the company sees as the end goal, which is usually bottom line driven.
So I'm curious if that is the thinking that needs to go into building out your internal marketing, then would you say that perhaps purpose-driven businesses have a better success rate, given that they've probably done some of the legwork up front, as opposed to other businesses that are trying to find a match with their employees?
Would agree. When you talk about purpose driven businesses, and purpose doesn't necessarily have to be anything that's airy fairy or along the lines of corporate social responsibility. Yeah, purpose is really just something that defines the why of the business. Why did we enter this industry in the first place? What problem are we solving? And what's the unique value proposition that we thought we could bring to the table? So that's purpose. And I believe that brands who understood that up front would have had perhaps a better opportunity to recruit and hire employees who are aligned with that why, with that purpose, with that vision. And once you have a team of people who are all, as it were, singing from the same hymn sheet, then they perhaps you could argue, yes, would have been a further bit way down the road with respect to what it is they wanted
Mhm.
to achieve and ensuring that employees are engaged with that. But it doesn't mean that all is lost if you didn't start there. But
Mhm.
to your question, I would agree that those purpose driven companies would have perhaps had a bit of a head start.
So finding a connection with your employees and addressing their purpose and intent certainly makes sense. But I guess the question in most people's minds would be, okay, Kerry, I get this whole idea of investing in employees, ensuring that they're engaged in order to better be advocates for our products and services and the overall brand in itself. But that seems a little bit nebulous. How do we correlate or make sure that there is a direct correlation to the efforts that we put into our employees that correlates to the bottom line?
That's an excellent question. And yes, because anything we do requires leadership buy in, right? So usually leadership buy in means that we're going to have to demonstrate bottom line impact. So there are a few things. First of all, when you talk about brand building, right? Anything that we do as marketers, any messages that we put out there as a brand, you're fighting against a lot of noise in the industry, in the marketplace. And even when you talk about online marketing, which is basically digital, it's everything that we do. We have to pay so much money and invest so much effort in getting our messages out there and above the noise. When you think of an engaged workforce of employees in your company who are advocating for the brand on your behalf by sharing valuable content that's industry related to their networks on platforms like LinkedIn or Twitter or any such appropriate social media platform, they enjoy much greater reach and engagement than we enjoy from the official company account. So when you talk about earned media that our employees can provide that builds the brand in a far more authentic way, that's an immediate benefit to the bottom line because, as we like to say, a rising tide lifts all boats. So once you have a wonderful brand that's being put out there in a unique way with people who are advocates because they know what's happening on the inside, there's that benefit. When we talk about revenue growth, Vinay, there's another opportunity to recognize that when your employees are engaged and they're generating leads, so when you talk about lead conversion and velocity, leads generated by your employees, they convert 7 times faster than the leads that you generate from your official company marketing channels, again, because the relationship is there, the trust is there, the authenticity is there. And they would have done a much better job at refining and reaching out to your ideal target audience. So again, those leads tend to convert much faster. So those are the immediate brand and revenue growth benefits. They're also wonderful employer branding benefits as well. Again, engaged employees, they talk about it on social media, whether we like it or not. They will go on sites like Glassdoor and they'll put your company brand on blast, or they may have great things to say. Happy employees will attract great talent. And in a space where attracting talent is super competitive any day of the week, when we have wonderful employees who are talking well of the organization, building a great employer brand on our behalf, telling everyone, hey, this is a great place to work, you get to attract great talent as well. And of course, any recruiter or leader loves to know that they have great talent on their team. So I would say those are the 3 areas that have tremendous bottom line impact that any leader would be happy to embrace.
With this idea of internal marketing, making sure your communication lands with your employees first off is important. Would you say that as leaders, if they look at the stats that you've just mentioned and think it's a wonderful idea and decide to invest in it, that they should set some some metrics as an end goal to ensure that the efforts that they put into internal marketing are actually paying dividends?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Metrics obviously are the outcome of internal marketing, or they certainly measure the outcome. And absolutely, I would recommend that. And some great metrics you can look at are things like earned media. When you talk about, again, our employees who are sharing messages pertaining to the brand online on social media. If we were to pay for the kind of reach and engagement that they enjoy, that we are otherwise getting for next to nothing because they're doing it organically, that's a metric that we can track on media. We can, again, track lead conversion, lead velocity, lead generation. We can also track things like performance. So again, internal marketing, when you talk about engaging your employees, our top performing employees staying, or are they leaving? Those are metrics that a leader would want to know. Are we just looking at engagement numbers from a place of, I'm just happy to work here, or are we seeing an impact on productivity? Your CX scores, your net promoter scores ought to be going up. Those are customers who are happy and happy to refer your brand to a friend, a family member, colleague. But there's also the employee net promoter score as well. Are employees happy with working there, and what's the likelihood that they will refer someone else to come and work with you? So those are some of the metrics that I think you can definitely set up as a leader as an indicator of just how well your internal marketing efforts are working.
That makes sense. I'm curious though, how would you distinguish your internal marketing efforts from perhaps some of your external marketing in order to ensure that you're able to distinguish between the two?
That's another great question. So, of course, external marketing is really anything that's going outside to your customers or prospective customers. And we know what those are. They're traditional advertising and promotional activity. Internal marketing is anything that you're doing in a similar vein to your employees and the channels that you would have the opportunity to engage them in. So, of course, you wouldn't put an internal marketing message on a television station because that's external. So, internal, you're talking about things like internal emails, newsletters, internal podcasts, town hall meetings with your employees or staff meetings, associate meetings, or whatever you call them. You also have things like internal events, things like even surveys, the same kind of survey activity that you would do to your customers to gauge their experience and their engagement with the brand. You do a similar thing, but with your employees to understand their engagement in the brand and their experience as employees. So anything that's really targeted at your team members internally is what you would see as part of internal marketing, and anything that's outside is external.
Okay, that makes sense. With clarity of communication, is that just this idea of making sure that it's whatever we're communicating is being talked about, shared internally, perhaps first off, and then where appropriate externally? Is that about the gist of it, or is there more that we could glean from this idea of ensuring that our communication is effective?
I'd just like to backtrack a little bit, Vinay, and say that the first thing, when we went back to audience analysis, when we mentioned it earlier in our discussion, audience analysis is where we would have to start where internal marketing is concerned. And you're talking about analyzing your audience, which in this case is your employees. And I know, obviously, we would be very much familiar with things like your traditional employee satisfaction and engagement surveys, and we definitely want to continue those, because those are the things that will tell you how happy your employees are with their work, the leadership, and of course, things like the employee net promoter score, the likelihood that they would be able to refer someone to come and work with your organization or your business. But what I'm also suggesting where internal marketing is concerned is to dive a little deeper in those surveys and even focus groups, if you can have them, to understand their level of engagement with the brand. Do they understand what we stand for as a business? Do they know our why and our purpose? Are they aligned with that? Do they know what our unique value proposition is? If someone were to come up to them, again, maybe a friend, a family member, a neighbor, and say, "Hey, I want to do business with your company, or I'm considering doing business with your competitor who works down the street. Why should I choose your company?" Those are questions that you need to know if your employees are able to answer. And this is whether they work on the front line, which is the obvious group, but also in the middle and back, because every employee knows someone who could be a potential customer. And if they're not engaged with the brand, they don't have that connection with it, they don't know what your unique value proposition is, then they can't be advocates. And so I would say that's where it has to start, is understanding what works and the level of engagement in the brand that exists in your employee base. We did a survey similar to that a couple of years ago when we wanted to get deeper into this whole thing of internal marketing, and we realized that our employees were happy. They thought the culture was great, generally happy with the leadership. They believed in the why of the brand. But the big sticking point for us was that they weren't clear about how our products and services worked and what our unique value proposition was. And that's a huge deal, because it's one thing that they're happy, but if they can't advocate for the brand externally to their communities, then that's a problem. So that's my encouragement. Start with understanding your employees. How engaged are they? Do they know the brand? Are they engaged with the brand? And can they advocate on behalf of the brand if asked to do? And if not, then you need to craft your internal communication messaging around those bits of information so that your team members are better empowered to be able to be advocates externally.
But just listening to what you're saying, I can't help but think that perhaps a good place to start would be to codify the culture of the organization in some way, shape, or form so that it can be referred to and communicated upon regularly and held as a standard bearer, so to speak. And the other aspect is certainly thinking about leadership within the organization is this idea of trust and transparency. I'm curious, what would be your take on all three? Sorry, perhaps shouldn't have asked you about all three at the same time, but maybe you can start with culture and work our way down.
You know, what you're really alluding to, Vinay, is that P of internal marketing. So in marketing, of course, those who are marketers, we know the foundational 4 Ps of marketing, although there are many more Ps than that right now, I'm sure, but place, price, product, promotion. And in internal marketing, your product it's the job, it's the culture, it's the leadership. How do employees feel about the product of the company, which again is their experience, the culture, the leadership. And it goes to reason that just in the same way, when you're selling or offering a product to customers outside, the first thing you need to do is make sure that the product works, that it's great, and that it's better than the competition, or certainly it solves your customer's problem better than the competition does. Now, in internal marketing, if the product is the culture, it's the leadership, it's the overall employee experience, if that product is weak, then don't start any marketing around that at all. Go back and fix a product. That's probably a different episode on your podcast, Vinay. But if there's an issue with your culture, if there's an issue where there's a lack of trust and transparency in leadership, if employees don't feel heard or valued or safe enough to speak or to be authentic, then the work needs to start with your leaders and your people team members, your people leaders especially, to fix those issues first as the product before you start marketing it. Because if you're marketing something that doesn't exist or doesn't work, then just in the same way your customers are not going to buy, your employees aren't going to buy into the message either. So start there.
And for someone who perhaps hasn't codified their culture, how would you recommend that it is codified, if you think that is an appropriate way of communication? Because a lot of companies have this ad hoc way of approaching culture. Yeah, where would you recommend people start with this whole idea of culture and codifying?
I would recommend, if there's any way that we can start back to the point of understanding the story of the brand as it pertains to what was the why this business was formed in the first place. And I know that could be sticky ground for some people because, hey, I just really started this business to make some money. And yeah, that's probably true. But when we thought of designing this particular product or service, what was the driving factor behind that? What was the problem that we were seeking to solve for the customer? When we looked out, our customers were probably already being served by competing organizations or soon to be our competitors. And there, we still saw a gap. We still saw a problem where customers weren't being adequately served in a particular way, or there was a problem of theirs that still was not being solved to their satisfaction. And there's something that was motivating us to step into this space and throw our hat in the ring and say, hey, we want to offer a similar type product, but solving the problem in a different way. If I may share, I'm the CMO of a financial services group, and our why was love. And, when people heard that, of course, every time I say it, everybody's like, a financial institution founded on the basis of love. That's crazy. At the time, what we saw was that as a bank, an investment company, there was a feeling of customers felt like they were being taken to the cleaners. Banks are really just here to pay us the lowest interest, charge us the highest fee. And our co-founders said we wanted to create a financial brand that was really serious about helping people to achieve their financial goals in a way where they felt heard, where they experienced the love and realized the greatness that was within them. And not just for our customers, but for our employees. And that was our why. And it drives everything that we do. And it's the same advice I give to brands, any brand as a business. What's your why? What was that thing, that story that drove your founding in the first place? And if you can write that story, engage your employees around that story, ensure as best as you can that people who you bring on board are aligned with that story, then I think that's what's going to help to drive your culture, because it creates a kind of a fulcrum effect that you can use to inform every decision that you make and the culture that you're trying to build and maintain.
And as part of that, would you recommend putting down values? Most times I've noticed that it tends to be on a poster on the wall or put up somewhere, but often overlooked simply because people get used to see it, but completely blind to it. How would you recommend that people refer back to the values and the origin story to ensure that everyone is heading in the right direction, so to speak?
So you mentioned writing it down, and absolutely that's always helpful. But again, I would encourage everyone to remember, go back to the why. because sometimes even the values that we put on a piece of paper, how we came up with those values, sometimes the values don't connect to the brand story or the why we were
Mhm.
formed in the first place. So always make sure that story is front and center. I would also recommend that there is not only orientation at the start, but if there's a way to make sure that founding set of core values, the why, the purpose is incorporated in how we operate. Again, going back to our experience, we are a brand founded on love. There is a statement that we have called the vision of love, which is the kind of organization that we're seeking to create. And an
Mm.
excerpt from that statement is read at the beginning of every major meeting. And so when we listen to that statement easily 3-4 times a week at various meetings, it's that reminder that says, this is why we exist. This is what we're seeking to build. And this is the kind of organization that we are. This is who we are. And you're really soaking it in to everyone's skin, as it were, by making sure that we go back to always that why, that purpose, and allow our decisions to inform it. So the fees that you charge, your pricing structure, your HR policies, if we were to connect all of those dots back to our why fulcrum, do they connect? And make sure that's consistent and remains consistent. It's not easy, but it's something that I recommend all brands do to make sure that we remain consistent and authentic.
Given that 15% of employees
Mhm.
worldwide, according to the research that I came across, are only, sorry, 15% of employees are engaged. That was just as the vast majority aren't. And is there something that needs to be said about employee rewards and recognition that speaks to this piece about engaging our employees on an ongoing basis that needs to be addressed either in the culture piece that we were talking about before or perhaps separately?
Yes. So again, those metrics are really appalling. And as I keep talking about these things in various wonderful conversations like this, obviously internal marketing is not getting
Mm.
the focus and attention that it deserves. And I do believe that rewards and recognition is certainly a major factor in how employees feel valued. Remembering again that employees don't work for us, they work for themselves. So, to the extent that they're able to achieve certainly their financial goals in the first instance, which is, of course, achieved through things like your salary and benefits, then they'd be happy. But I think there's a whole other piece that needs to be explored as well, because having had conversations myself with representatives of wonderful brands who do internal marketing and have great internal engagement, other things coming forward, things like thank you.
Mm.
How often are leaders saying thank you to their team members? Do team members feel valued and heard? Do they feel able to speak up without fear of retribution? Do you have a situation where team members feel that there is mutual accountability across the board and not just at the lower tiers of the ladder, but on the upper tiers as well? Are people being held accountable equally, no matter where you are in the organization? Are there unique benefits that are available beyond the traditional salary and profit share? Are there other ways that we are engaging our team members, whether it be through flexi work time, hybrid work where that's possible, remote work? There are so many ways that companies, I think, can get far more creative in how they engage their team. And I think there's definitely an opportunity for companies to take advantage of those things and recognize that if we don't have engaged team members, we don't have
Mm.
engaged employees, it's going to impact our customer experience, it's going to impact our bottom line.
Is it just a matter of listing out ways in which we could show appreciation for our employees, then reward them specifically for perhaps activities that are very much in line with the overall values and the vision of the company? How would you recommend we approach this in light of the fact that there's also perhaps a need for people to engage or feel connected to their fellow colleagues within the organization as well?
In terms of what I'm picking up is that you're asking what's the how? How
Mm.
can leaders find out what they can do to drive deeper engagement? And my first recommendation would be to speak with the team members themselves, speak with the employees themselves, because again, they're your primary audience. They usually have a lot of the answers that you're looking for. So again, through surveys and focus groups, I know
Mm.
I've done a lot of internal focus groups and a lot of folks have no problem sharing very openly where they see shortcomings, have the conversations here
Mhm.
where they see the shortcomings and use that as a wonderful place to generate new ideas about how you can engage your team. Of course, reading widely is also something I recommend. There are wonderful publications right across the world that speak about employee engagement and using those tools as ways to again generate more ideas about how you can engage your employees. I start with asking the very people you're trying to engage and see what they recommend for your particular situation.
Listen to everything you said. Would I be wrong in suggesting that there perhaps is a need to not just ensure that staff are engaged, but also that the work culture is what it should be, that staff morale is what it should be, that they are satisfied in their roles and in the way leadership is performing, and that their experience also counts? Are there perhaps five key areas that we need metrics for, as opposed to your traditional engagement survey that tends to go out?
Yes. So I would say that I don't know if I define it as five key areas. I would say
Mm,
the metrics that you want to track would have to be related to what is the outcome that you're trying to drive. So in our organization, we had no issue with things like employee net promoter score because our employees were generally happy and were happy to
mm,
recommend folks to
mhm,
come and work with us. The issue we had was lack of awareness of the value proposition, lack of awareness of our products and services.
mhm,
And so we would have designed communication strategies to bring about greater awareness. And through those communication strategies, we would then test awareness and knowledge of our products and services to see if those communication pieces are working. So I would say choose the kind of metrics that you're trying to drive. I would add to what you were sharing, though, Vinay, that I think what we also need to drive to and look at is advocacy, which is
mhm,
really the end game of internal marketing. It's what are our employees doing as it pertains to their level of motivation to advocate for the brand externally. Because that's really where you're going to see a lot of the fruits of your internal marketing labor. So it's engagement in the product that you're offering, which is the culture and the job, is one thing. But
mhm,
whether or not they're emotionally connected to the brand and whether or not they're motivated and empowered to advocate or be great ambassadors for the brand externally, that's where you're going to cross the chasm, as it were, on whether or not your internal marketing is actually working. Because if your people don't feel motivated or empowered to speak about the brand in a positive way externally, then your internal marketing wouldn't have fulfilled its ultimate purpose.
That makes a lot of sense. I know we've covered a fair bit of ground and talked about various ways in which we could potentially implement internal marketing, but is there perhaps a framework or a set of principles that you would strongly recommend people use?
Certainly. So the first thing is do your research. So design your internal marketing surveys that seek to understand not just your employee engagement and employee experience, but your employee awareness of and connection to the brand. You
Mhm,
want to test that first. Based on the outcome of that sort of research, then you would want to then fix your product, which is your culture, the place of work, leadership, anything that you believe is impacting or hurting employee engagement. You want to address those. Provided those are good to go, then the next step would be designing your promotional strategies, promotions to your employees that again address and speak to the messages that need to be shared. So
mhm,
whether it's about the brand story or unique value proposition, our products and services, how they work, why are they better than the competition? Design your communication promotional strategies to your employees to make sure that they understand and are connected to all of these. And then the final piece is how are we empowering our employees to be advocates and ambassadors outside? And that can take many forms. I know the popular form, which is a controversial topic, Vinay, because a lot of brands are not really comfortable with their employees going outside and talking about the company or the business. But the reality is, again, we spoke earlier that if your employees are speaking well of the brand, they can carry your brand in areas that we couldn't get to with the official
mm,
company channels. So if we can partner with our employees by empowering them through offering social media training, personal branding training, helping them to understand their own personal brands, how do they show up? How do they create and or maybe perhaps share content online that it creates again value to their community so people see the company brand in a
Mhm.
positive light as well. How do they engage in dark social channels, which I know in B2B tech is huge because a lot of the decision making process that our customers go through are in dark social channels like the DMs and the emails and the WhatsApp groups and the Slack groups, where they're trying to find out what tool can help them solve the problem best. If our employees feel empowered to be able to go into those conversations and be great representatives of the brand, they need to be empowered to do that. So that's the final piece. Make sure that your employees are, in fact, empowered and enabled, and ultimately from being motivated initially to share all the great things about your brand externally.
Excellent. And also curious, in your internal marketing experiences, is there perhaps a tool that you find that's been quite useful in getting your message across? If so, what would it be?
Wow. I'd probably get myself in trouble if I were to call any names. But I know, obviously, I'm the internal marketing podcast, and I have a wonderful sponsor who is Workshop. And Workshop really is a great internal communications tool. It's a platform that allows you to design wonderful campaigns and messages that you can share through various channels internally, whether it be Slack, Microsoft Teams. And it makes it easier to do and design those campaigns and messages and push them out to your team. So that's the internal marketing part. So it's one that I recommend. But I know there are a number of other platforms that
Mhm.
do the same thing. So I encourage everybody to do their research. Now, on the employee advocacy side, there are a number of tools available. There's none that I can personally recommend. But if you were to just do a quick search on employee advocacy software or platforms, a number of them will come up and you can do your research. And what those platforms really do, Vinay, is that they create a place where content can be created and shared with a group of your employee ambassadors so they can perhaps take the content. Some prefer to cut and paste, not ideal, but some will take the content and perhaps repurpose it into their own way and style and post it on their personal channels as well. And it creates a communication framework for your employee advocates who want to share the brand and the great story about the brand externally. It's a nice platform that allows them to stay connected and how to do so easily. But I'd say those are the two areas where technology would be helpful to do both internal marketing and employee advocacy.
And with the workshop, is that the tool you were recommended, or was there a bit of a research process in order to find what would be best fit for you?
So they were the sponsor of my podcast. So they are the sponsor. I just wrapped up season 3. I'm making preparations for season 4 right now as we speak. But they were my season 3 and season 2 sponsor. So as a brand that's passionate about internal marketing, we were
Mhm.
connected and I was introduced to them and their platform. So again, they're not the only platform of its kind.
Certainly.
So I would recommend everyone do their research, but they're certainly very good at what they do.
Right. And congratulations on season 4.
Thank
I
you.
look forward to hearing some more of that. I'm also curious. I know we've covered a fair bit of ground, but is there
Yes.
perhaps an area or two around this idea of internal marketing that you find doesn't get talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
So the area that generally I don't think internal marketing gets talked about enough generally, Vinay. I always tell folks if you go on LinkedIn and see how many folks follow the hashtag internal marketing, we're probably at about 100. So there's a lot of ground left to be covered. And most of the literature I find is more so academic than business
Mhm.
related. But I would say that a lot of what doesn't get covered is really in the whole matter of just how important it is and the understanding of what it can bring. So we know what marketing is. Internal communications is a popular, very popular nomenclature. I think almost every company has, if not an internal communications team, but certainly an internal
Mhm.
communications person. But internal marketing really takes that a step further. And I think that's another opportunity for businesses to be able to have the conversation is what's the difference between internal comms and internal marketing? And while they're highly similar, because internal communicators are great strategists at understanding how to get a message through to your internal audience to again drive a particular kind of behavior, where internal marketing is concerned, the behavior we're trying to fashion is to convert our employees into advocates. And if not, you don't want to say convert because I don't want to get people nervous. It's really motivating and empowering them to believe that they can be great advocates of the brand externally or ambassadors of the brand. That's the difference. And if it is as an organization, you have a marketing team, you have a HR or people team, and you have an internal communications team. If what you're doing is not driving an outcome of motivating and empowering your employees to speak about the brand externally, then that's the opportunity you need to fashion. And I think marketers, given their background and experience in driving behavior to buy a product or service or buy into it, and you have your internal communicators, you have your HR team, which they're the ones that are big on culture. If we all can work together in our various functional areas and create an internal marketing strategy and a set of outputs that drive the outcome that we want, which is engagement and empowerment of our team to be advocates, then that to me is the great opportunity that a lot of businesses need to tap into. So that's the first one. And then the second one, which again, bearing in mind your audience are largely in the B2B tech space, it's in the whole area of employee advocacy, particularly as it pertains to how are we empowering our employees to build their own personal brands. And that is a hot button topic, Vinay, because what we find is a lot of companies, perhaps out of fear of the risk of what could happen to the brand when we have our team members going out on LinkedIn and sharing content, they tend to want to muzzle their employees. If we're in the B2B tech space, think of the complex decision-making process that our customers tend to go through when they're choosing a technology solution or software or platform to buy. That complex decision-making process is going to be made easier through conversations and relationships. And we can't drive those through our official marketing messages, through our marketing channels. It's our people we're going to have to rely on to drive those. And yes, obviously, our sales team, they're the number one priority where that is concerned. But don't discount the folks in the middle and the back office because they're the ones that are designing the software, the experience. They need to be on board with the brand as well. And there's an opportunity to help them to find their voices and build their personal brands on social media through building communities, sharing valuable content. Because you know what? The stronger their brands become as representatives of your company, the company brand gets to go along for the ride. And you couldn't pay again for that sort of engagement and reach. And so, if we can empower people to build strong personal brands, the company brand will benefit. It's at a fraction of the cost, it's far more efficient and cost effective. So, that's the second aspect of internal marketing leading to employee advocacy that I highly recommend your listeners consider.
Absolutely. Sound advice there. And employee advocacy is certainly an issue that I would agree tends to be brushed under the carpet, so to speak. So
Yes.
it's certainly worth looking into. Kerry-Ann, this has been fascinating. To wrap things up, if you were listening to this episode, what would be your top takeaway?
The top takeaway that I would have is that my people, my employees, are my number one brand advocates. They're not not my customers, not the CEO, and certainly not the marketing team posting a bunch of Google ads. It's my employees. They're my top brand advocates. And so if I don't engage them in the brand, if they're not connected to the brand, if they don't believe in the brand and what we do and what we offer, then they're not going to be motivated to share it. If we're not creating the kind of culture and environment that allows them to thrive and feel good about being a part of what it is we're doing, then what's going to happen is they're not going to be empowered or even motivated to advocate on behalf of the brand. And so if I want to win as a brand, if I want to grow my bottom line, I need to have my people engaged and empowered to be able to be a part of that journey. And so the takeaway is start with your people.
And if listeners are curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
The best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn and I love to engage with new folks and meet new folks there. So feel free to reach out. I'm Kerry-Ann Stimpson on LinkedIn. But also my podcast, the Internal Marketing Podcast. It's available on all major podcasting platforms. And if you were to Google it, the website will come right up, and have a listen and engage there and join the conversation.
Yeah, we'll include links to that in the show notes. Kerry-Ann, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me, Vinay. It's been my pleasure.
Mm.